This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all here. The ACC National Capital Region's Pro Bono Committee is pleased to present this voter protection program, which will be presented by Nancy Anderson, Director of Pro Bono with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under the Law. The purpose of today's session is to share volunteer opportunities with Election Protection's 2022 National Voter Hotlines, the process for signing up, and what will be asked of the volunteers. We're recording this session, so if you wish to share it with others following the program, that would be great. And we will have time for questions at the end. Additionally, following Nancy's presentation, we have Ben Fuller, Senior Director, Corporate Counsel at Otsuka Pharmaceuticals. He'll share his experience as a volunteer, and then we'll close out the session. Okay, passing it to you, Nancy.
Great. Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for including me in this presentation and for thinking of election protection and the Lawyers Committee. It's wonderful to know that so many lawyers and others are interested in, I hate to say this, but working to preserve democracy. At least that's where I'm viewing it these days. But I will go ahead and get started in terms of election protection and the Lawyers Committee. First, before I do talk about election protection, just to give you some quick background on the Lawyers Committee, I am the Director of Pro Bono and have been with the Lawyers Committee for 23 years, which just blows my mind. But the Lawyers Committee was founded in 1963 when President Kennedy and his brother, the Attorney General, invited over 250 of the country's most prominent white male lawyers to the White House to engage them in the civil rights movement. And they viewed this as a critical recruitment effort, so to speak, because before the event in June of 1963, Governor Wallace, who from Alabama, had stood on the steps of the University of Alabama and had defied the Supreme Court order requiring that Blacks be admitted to the university. And this was even more problematic to many of the lawyers because Governor Wallace was a lawyer. He knew better. I mean, everybody knew better, right? But he was a lawyer ignoring the rule of law. And so since that time, the Lawyers Committee has engaged in fighting for racial justice with the help of the private bar. And we do work in all of the traditional civil rights areas that you can think of, and also in what has always also been traditional areas, but maybe weren't identified as such as health equity. We're seeing a lot of that recently, those discussions after the Dobbs decision. But one of the cornerstone projects of the Lawyers Committee is our engagement in election protection. And election protection is the nation's largest nonpartisan voter protection coalition, which is comprised of hundreds of national, state, and local organizations that are working to ensure that those who are eligible are able to cast their vote and have that vote counted. And that work continues throughout the years, not just during major presidential election cycles, or major election cycles, but during major election cycles, such as presidential and midterms, we also have a tremendous initiative of the National Voter Hotline. So before I get into the National Voter Hotline, just to tell you a little bit more about some of the other work of election protection, it also organizes and utilizes volunteers for poll monitors, and also for social media monitoring. Now, non-lawyers are able to volunteer for that, so that may be a little bit more outside of this audience. And those are organized by our partners, primarily Common Cause and State Voices. So there is another opportunity to volunteer there. But in terms of the National Voter Hotline, the Lawyers Committee manages and administers it, and it has been around, and I didn't even tell you, the election protection has been around since the 2000 election. Those of us who are old enough to remember what happened during that mess. And the hotline has been around since 2004. So it is a resource that's available to all voters to call and ask questions, report problems, either maybe more of a systemic issue, polling place not being open, or maybe the problem is I registered and I'm not on the roll. What do I do? The calls are answered by trained legal volunteers, and that includes lawyers, law students, and paralegals. And I'll get more into like, what does it actually mean to volunteer? What do you do? How do you get the support and all of that? But before I do, I also wanted to mention that partners operate an Asian languages hotline, which is part of election protection. And there's also an Arabic and Spanish hotlines. And the Arabic and Asian language hotlines utilize volunteers. The Spanish language has actually hired staff. But it's a great resource for many, many Americans across the country to be able to call. So the hotline is operational year-round. That didn't used to be the case, but in 2000, we decided to have it staffed by legal volunteers 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. Previously, it was staffed mainly during the lead up to major election cycles. And then, of course, we did return voicemails, but now we have volunteers staffing the hotline year round. At the moment, it is just Monday through Friday, but starting early October, we will start having weekend hours, and we will also have extended hours. Currently, I think it's 10 to 4, and then we will move to 10 to 6, and then maybe 9 to 9, something like that. We're in that, things are changing as we get closer to the election. So let's see, let me think through. All right, so I'm going to tell you more about like the questions that come in, but in terms of what is it actually like? How do you get trained? What support do you have? If you can think of an inverted triangle, as I try to do it with my hands, with the biggest part of the triangle being the number of voters who call the hotline. And then the next level is the volunteers who take the phone calls. And then the next level are captains. And captains are those who support volunteers during their shift, so that if volunteers have questions, they're not able to, maybe it's a difficult problem, or it's a systemic problem, or it's a threat, or any kind of thing beyond that. Those captains are there to either take over the call or to provide assistance directly to the volunteer, who then continues on with the voter. That happens primarily through a chat function. Fortunately, we're all a little more used to chat functions this year than we were in 2020, which I failed to mention that the hotline is actually fully remote. So you're able to do it from your office, your home, wherever. Prior to 2020, it was actually in person. So a lot of benefits to being in person, but one of the best things about being remote is that we're able to utilize volunteers from across the country and not just in DC in the lead up to Election Day. But so going back to that inverted triangle, not doing a very good job here. Voters, volunteers, captains, and then those captains are supported by leads or the lawyers committee staff. Because I mentioned the support for the captains, because we do also need captains. And those are usually folks who have volunteered for 3-ish shifts as a volunteer, and then they take additional training to be a captain. And again, at the very tippy point are lawyers committee staff and then leads who are managing the overall call center. Volunteers, when they're taking calls through the platform that's on their phone, they then input information from the voter into our system called Our Vote Live. And that's our online database that the coalition is able to use, one, to make sure that any outstanding issues with a specific voter is followed up, but it also allows us as a coalition to see trends, maybe more like systemic problems, Could be that there are, we realize that within a county, there's multiple polling places that don't have ballots, whatever it may be. It's a tremendously important tool that the coalition uses that wouldn't exist if the volunteers didn't input that data into the Our Vote Live. The other thing is that volunteers, in addition to it's around 2 hours on demand training, and I'll get to that in a minute, volunteers also have at their disposal during their shift access to state FAQs and other resources. And those are all on what we call EP Legal, a website that is easy to move through. And Ben, if you haven't volunteered this year, it's much improved from 2020. More organized, a little more visually easier to go through. But the FAQs essentially answer, I would say, 90 to 95% of the questions that come in. So those are available for the volunteer during their session. So again, they're answering calls on their computer, inputting information into a database, which that link is now in our new hotline platform. And then they also have access to all these materials, and they get the support of the captains throughout their shift. So what type of questions are we seeing? Essentially the whole gambit. I mean, it's really interesting because before 2020, definitely the majority of the questions were about, am I registered and where do I vote? And some of you may be like, well, that is like really basic stuff. Why am I helping voters? Why am I spending my time answering those questions? Can't they figure it out themselves? It's not so easy. I don't know about where you all are registered to vote, but many counties and state election sites are complicated. They're hard to find the answers to these questions. And in a lot of places, there has been polling place consolidation, which actually makes it even harder to figure out where folks are voting. Since 2020 and in 2020, no surprise to all of us, there has been a tremendous increase in voting not in person. So whether it's vote by mail or voting in person, but early to avoid crowds. And we're continuing to see lots and lots of questions about that. And, it is funny because voting by mail, voting early, absentee ballot, those kind of, in some states, those are all the same thing. In some states, they're different. Voting on election day, there are different deadlines for registering, for getting your ballot, for requesting a ballot, for what if I mail my ballot back? What if I drop it off in a drop box? And wait, there's only one drop box for my entire county? Where on earth is that? It seems to have gotten even more complicated since 2020 with the changes in the laws, in some respects, trying to make it easier to vote. And then in many states, as we've all heard in the past 2 years, they're making it a hell of a lot more difficult to vote. So there's lots and lots of those questions and confusion on the voters of like, how do I go about voting? And then certainly for some of the early voting and then in-person voting, we then also hear about problems with polling places not opening up on time, police presence, maybe partisan activity going on at the polling place that's not supposed to happen. So it's a variety of those type of questions, but certainly a lot of them are basic. How on earth do I vote and what are the deadlines and where do I do that? And I say basic because it should be basic, but it actually can be pretty challenging to find all those answers for the voter looking on their own. Okay, so I know I'm all over the place, so I apologize about that. How do you go about volunteering? How do you get the training? What do you do? It's actually really straightforward, which is awesome. You go to our election protection We the Action site, and I'll put that email address or that website address in the chat in a moment. I can't walk and talk, but when Ben is talking in a minute, I'll do that. You put in your zip code, which is actually a remnant from when we designed our volunteer management system when we were in person. So it really doesn't matter what you put in, but still put in a zip code. You put in your email address and then your status of whether you're a lawyer, a law student, or a paralegal. And then it'll pull up open shifts. And so you are able to sign up for specific shifts where we have a need for volunteers. After you select your shifts, you are automatically directed to the training page. And there's where you will select that you want the on-demand training. That's the only option for the hotline. And then you'll complete your, your information for yourself, hit submit, and then you will get automatic reminders about your shifts. And about 2 weeks before your shift, you will get the email with the link to the on-demand training. We send your password to be able to actually do your shift. It's like a day or two before your shift, and all of those platforms I mentioned, Our Vote Live, the Hotline platform, and the EP Legal, we access those through a single sign-on through Okta. So it's just the one password that you need. It's very easy. And once you log into Okta, you see the links to be able to open up your hotline platform and then the EP Legal. And as I mentioned, the OVL is actually built into the hotline platform now. So it's really pretty straightforward. One thing that I should mention, right now, the hotline is operating with just one quote unquote call center. As we move forward, we will be shifting to a regional call center model, which will then have 4 different call centers based on time zones. And so there you'll have states that are grouped together based on those time zones. And so you could kind of guess what states are included in what, because I think it's East, Southeast, Central, and West. And then in mid-October, those will be operational like 9 to 9 for their time zone. Now, if you're in the Eastern time zone, everything is going to show up on Eastern time zone because it's going to talk to your computer somehow and know that you're in the Eastern time zone. So don't be alarmed if you're like, I thought I signed up for the West and now I'm getting everything in East Coast. Aren't I volunteering in the Pacific time zone? It automatically adjusts to your time zone. I was freaked out and reached out to We the Action. I was like, this isn't working. And they said, no, it is. And then on election day and the day before, we split those out to even more. And we have around 22 call centers. And those are hosted by law firms. And they're just helping us to manage the around 600-800 volunteers that we will have on deck at any time on election day and the day before. Before I pass it over to Ben, who is going to tell you about his experience, the one thing that I just want to note right now is it is unclear the call volume that we are going to have this year. And I say that because it impacts the potential need for volunteers. We're in this weird transition phase where prior to 2020, makes sense, election day call volume and midterm cycles was always less than it was for presidential cycles. But we were easily able to do over the years, an actual pretty good estimate of the call volume in October, in September, and then on election day. 2020 threw all of that out the window as so many of us were voting early or absentee or vote by mail. And call volume on election day was actually the same as midterm cycles. We don't know right now what that's going to look like, if we're still going to have a high call volume before election day, if it'll be all on election day. Right now, call volume is pretty darn low. Now, none of the absentee ballots have gone out yet, so those kind of questions aren't popping up, but we're just not sure. So as a result, you could go to the website today and there may not be any volunteer shifts available. I encourage you just to go ahead and keep checking back because it is all in flux at the moment as we kind of figure out this new world and when folks will be voting and what types of questions they will have. So I know I threw a lot at you pretty quickly. I am going to pass it off to Ben so he can talk about his specific experience. And if folks have questions, please feel free to pop some into the chat if I can find it, which I need to, so I can put in the website. But Ben, it's all yours.
Thanks, Nancy. So we did this as a legal organization back in 2020. Everything that Nancy said, it was consistent with what we experienced, but I'll say it was easy back then. So if it's improved, that's even better. It was not a difficult system. We often, we're a relatively small, busy legal group, so we like to look for pro bono where there's options for it to be discreet, so it's not something that is lasting for months and months and having a lot of work, and that we still all feel really good about what we did. And voter protection really fits that mold. The training was all very easy to follow. People who had questions while we were doing it, we were able to quickly access them, so no one felt overwhelmed. It was one of our better attended events, which is really important to us and the team. And we got involved because we all believe that, promoting the democracy and free elections is core to being attorneys or in the legal system. And we all really wanted to do it. And on that point, it was nonpartisan, so we avoided any sort of questions that we might have and sort of promoted our general belief that diversity of thought is a good thing. The actual day was easy. It was interesting to hear what people's questions were and what they were sort of going through to try to figure out just how to vote. It made you feel like you actually helped someone when you did have an answer for them and were able to push it in the right direction. And so it was really a very positive experience. And talking to my other colleagues in legal, they all agreed. I had a similar experience as far as what the types of calls were that Nancy expressed. A lot of questions about, at the time, the big ones in the news were voting by mail and early voting, and there was a lot of misinformation out there. I happen to be a Pennsylvania resident and got a few questions about the 2020 run up to the Pennsylvania election, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, was confusing for a lot of people. And so it actually stands as one of the easier and better received pro bonos we've done. It hit the right tone as far as getting a lot of people involved. No one feeling that they were sort of outside of their expertise, because we did have those resources. And I really can't recommend it enough. You and your team will feel that you're coming away from it having actually helped people in a very immediate way. So I really, really encourage everyone to get involved and get their organizations involved. And also, as Nancy said, anytime that we can get our paralegals involved, we're always really happy to do that, because we always get that question whether they can participate, and oftentimes they can't. And so it's great when we find a pro bono project where everyone can participate.
And I did put into the chat the website, and also just want to note that you do not have to volunteer for a call center that's in your geographic area. You can sign up for any of the time zones. And I also put in the email address, like if you have a question just specifically about volunteering as an individual, just please email epvolunteer@lawyerscommittee.org. If you have a more general question about maybe your legal department volunteering, you can email me at nanderson@lawyerscommittee.org. And I will make this pitch. I'm not part of the comms team, but if any of you work for corporations that pushes information out to the public, You know, the phone doesn't ring if people don't know that it's available. So, you know, would be delighted to talk with you about, hey, maybe on some of your stuff, you could say, call 866 our vote. This is available for everyone. I think in the past we had DoorDash and other big partners. I can't remember now all who they are, but would be delighted to have that. And someone just asked a bit about how it works to have the captain support while you're taking calls. Ben, I don't know if you had that experience, or I can talk about it.
Yeah, if I'm remembering correctly, I know I should remember everything 2 years ago, but a lot's happened in the intervening time. There was someone there in sort of the chat or in the program that we could bounce any questions off of, including substantive questions about, you know, the answer. You know, sometimes questions were so complex or so nuanced that it wasn't obvious to us. And so we had sort of this captain there that was able to help out with, quite frankly, technical support as we were coming in, and also sort of the substantive questions. So, you know, that's sort of an example of why this is one of the easier ones. We never felt like we didn't have that sort of stopgap or help that we needed to get things going. You know, a lot of we're all real busy, and I'm sure that's true for everyone on the phone. And so we didn't have time to necessarily test the systems and test everything before. I'm seeing that, you know, my involvement was with them via chat. I'm looking at Andrea's comment. I'm sure that they were available by phone for us as well. I just didn't have to use it because it was simple enough that I was able to move without that.
Actually, I'm glad that you put that in the chat, because that is a new functionality this year that we built into, I believe it's Twilio or maybe the website. I can't remember, but we do have that. So there was a question, is if you want to sign up but there are no shifts available, will the system alert us when shifts become available? You actually will just have to keep checking the site. We did not build that into it. That would have been useful. Maybe when we do a redo, but you'll just have to keep checking the site. And again, the zip code is pretty much irrelevant. It is left over from when we built this volunteer management system with We the Action in 2018, call centers were still in person. So the zip code was required. And when we went remote, it still is in the system. We couldn't like unbake it. We couldn't take it out without the whole system crashing. So it, other than the 1 or 2 legal field programs that are in the system of We the Action, and right now it's only for the Atlanta area, it won't matter what your zip code is. So there was a question, is there training and documentation to guide volunteers through questions? Would we report certain issues to state boards of election directly? Volunteers do not do outreach to state election officials. We actually, that's what we have the captains and the leads and the staff for. And most importantly, we have very close relationships in most states with on the ground partners who handle that direct communication with state boards of elections. And that is actually really important, because in many places, even if the state may be antagonistic to voting rights, the election staff are not. And we saw that in the 2020 elections, and, you know, fingers crossed that still holds true for 22. But they develop these really important relationships and know how and who and how to reach out to people. But in terms of training and documentation to guide you through the questions, the training, the 2-hour training does cover both the platform, how to use it, and the Our Vote Live actually has questions that essentially guide you through what to ask. So it's like, you know, what's your name? What are you calling about? So it really helps walk you through all of that. And the state FAQs are broken down by issue areas. And again, we'll be able to help you answer that. Okay, then there's a question of how does the call center work logistically in a remote context? Do you call for your home office? Do you provide your own number? Do you have emails? It is actually just like using Zoom. I mean, you are using the hotline platform through a website. So it has nothing to do with a phone, has nothing to do with your email, other than you need an email to get your login credentials. It is just like right now, you're doing this all through your laptop. I don't believe that the platform is supported very well through iPads or tablets. You do need an actual computer. Headphones are great, right? But we've now been living through this for the past 2.5 years, so we're used to this. And then how does a volunteer get advice from captains in a few seconds? It's again through the chat function. And we have plenty of folks who are the captains who are on standby waiting to take those questions and support volunteers. And then someone asked me how about, tell you guys about how our organization is funded. We do receive restricted funding from foundations to work on this. And then we do get money from individuals, corporations and law firms. The election protection program, I will admit, is a really expensive one. The hotline platform, I don't know the numbers, but it varies. But during major election cycles, we have to pay between $500,000 and $1 million for the platform alone. It is just wackadoodle, but that's what we have to do. But if any of you guys want to support our organization, and I'm not the money person as well as not the communications person, would love to be able to have further discussions with you. And the Lawyers Committee does really good work, which is why I've stuck with us for 23 years. Does anyone else have any questions? Did I answer the questions, hopefully? Well, again, I really, really appreciate being a part of this and all of you taking the time to learn more. This is really critical work. I don't need to tell you that, but these are scary times for our democracy. We need to make sure our elections work and that people's votes are counted. But thank you again.
Okay, so if there's no further questions, we will conclude today's session. If you have additional questions, we'll ask Nancy to put, she already put her contact information in the chat, so you can, where you can follow up. I want to thank Nancy Anderson at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, as well as Ben Fuller at Otsuka Pharmaceuticals, and as well as the Pro Bono Committee for hosting today's session. Additionally, if you have relationships with organizations on voter protection or related topics, nonpartisan, please, we'd be happy to bring additional information to our members. Please reach out to me, Kirsten Keating, or Michael Howson. You can email probono@accnationalcapitalregion.com to contact us. And thank you so much for your participation today.